funded particular. Thank you all for muting during the talks. We've got fantastic lineup today. We've got 5 speakers and we're focusing on clinical effectiveness or clinical evaluation and validation in this session. Our first speaker is my colleague Rachel Evley from the Research Design Service East Midlands. So if you could all mute, and any questions you've got, please pop them into the chat and we will answer them in a Q&A at the end.
Thank you, Sean. I'll just share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that. Right, so it's just a brief, quick overview of what our Research Design Service can do to support you in writing your i4i application or any of the AI type ones as well, so a bit more technical ones. So the Research Design Service was founded over 10 years ago now. So we support health, public health, social care research, and specifically any of the NIHR funding streams. So i4i comes under that. We are a free and confidential advice service. So as you can see, there are 10 of us across the country. East Midlands are presenting today, but I do believe that some of you are from out of our region, and so there will be an RDS that will be able to support you where you are. We have a service that can help with the designing of the research. We have methodologists working together. So I'm a qualitative researcher by background. Sean's a clinical trialist. We have statisticians, health economists, patient and public involvement leads. So each of the different RDSs will have a similar setup in what they can offer you. We support i4is and have done over 10 years now, and we have a lot of experience within that, although some regions obviously have more i4i applications going through than perhaps East Midlands, but our success rate at the moment is still around about 50% at stage 2 across the years that we've been supporting them. We can also help you identify and applying for different funding streams if i4i isn't the one for you, but it could be that UKRI or any of the other research councils, MRC, any of the charities as well. So we have a big list of funders that we do support. As you can see, that's our Twitter handle down the bottom, and you can also find us on our website, which gives you more of an idea of what we can actually provide for you, because we do have a lot of different service offers available. So it might be that you just want to talk to somebody about public involvement, you might want to come into one of our multidisciplinary advice panels, or you might want to actually have a final stage review before it goes into the funder. A lot of the research design services across the country have a very similar core service. Some of us might differ in what we can offer in more depth, but we do have a basic core level of service to be able to offer you. So today I thought I'd just have a quick flick through our impact, our application wheel here to give you an idea of how we can support against your application. So probably one of the biggest things is the evidence. So why is this research needed? So you're going to have to be able to prove, show that there's a need for it, that there is nothing really out there. You're filling a gap in what's available, and we can support. We have information people here to be able to support you with showing you how to. We're moving perhaps more away from doing the systematic review for you because we don't actually have the capacity, but we can definitely point you in the right directions for all the different databases, where to find studies that have already been published or actually funded by NIHR or other funders. So we have a wealth of information available around what you need to do for that evidence. Within the application itself, there is a section that you're going to have to justify why this research is important and why it needs to be done now. So if we move on to the team, you've got to have an appropriate team supporting you within this. So we're looking at breadth and depth. So think about, do your team have all the disciplinary skills needed to deliver the proposed programme? So a lot of things with i4i, you've probably got 3 different types of team within you. You've got your SMEs, you've got your universities, and you've also probably got your NHS services as well. So it's working together and making sure that somebody brings something to the table within this application. these are quite big. I mean, the funding for these ranges quite a lot, between sort of like 200, 300,000 right up to 1.2 million. So, you know, make sure that you've got the appropriate team there to be able to support your thing. And they've got to have a commitment as well. So, you know, these projects can last up to 4 years, and it's making sure that there is the commitment from that team member to be there, because they might not be there at, you know, needed at the beginning. They might be needed further down the line, especially if we're looking at qualitative researchers sitting within an i4i. But you've got to make sure that they're going to still be around then. So, you know, it's one thing to check that as you assemble your team, think about, you know, the commitment needed, and get them in early to make sure that they're part of, you know, the application being, you know, being put together. So within the impact, this is really important for MRHR. So you've got to show there's potential benefit to NHS and social care, or patients and others, and how will this potential be realised? There's also a thing to think about within the i4i things. We've got things like intellectual property, and you've also got regulatory approvals that need to be done. So these all need to be actually, you know, making sure that you can actually show impact, and commercialisation at the end of the day, that could be part of the impact within your application. We talked about patient and public involvement last week. It's meaningful throughout. Some brilliant you know, talks last week around about this, and how, you know, being involved all the way across the actual, you know, application being put together, as well as during the study itself. So I'd, you know, go back and watch those videos. Great ideas, really good talks from last week. So within the funder wheel, we can help you with the remit to make sure that you're within the remit, because there are three different levels of i4i available. What are the priorities for the NHS, the NHS at the moment, Department of Health? You know, does this fit in nicely with what's going on? Can we help strengthen your application by knowing what the priorities are and how your application fits into that? We can help with the process. It takes quite a long time to put one of these applications together. They are quite detailed, and you will need to, you know, work with lots of different people as you're putting it together. So we can help support you within that process. Deadlines, they do come on the websites, but sometimes we know ahead of what's going to be happening, and we tend to know what's going on at the moment. So it's worth, you know, working with us to actually, so we can get you to the right deadline. And sometimes you might need to defer to the next one, just because it's not quite there yet, and it's better to defer than actually waste your shot at getting it through. So think about the different deadlines and working back from those. Although i4i hasn't got a fixed funding limit, it is sitting within a finite pool of funding. So a lot of the time we don't see them running above, so like 1 to 1.2 million. If it's going above that, you really need to justify why you need that much. And a lot tend to sit just, you know, around about the £1 million mark, if not lower. So we can help you with, you know, thinking about how, you know, what the funding is, what you're asking for, and, you know, where might, if you've got to cut money out of it, where we might be able to help you think about where to do that, and making sure it's a competitive bid. So, you know, that's all to do with what we've talked about before, but, you know, we've got review panels, and we've got multidisciplinary advice panels, and it's just helping you, you know, create an application that is competitive. As they talked about in the very first week, a lot of the time they probably take through perhaps 50% through from stage 1 into stage 2. So, or even less. So it is a very competitive competition, but once you're through that part, you've got a better chance of being funded. And then finally, the design. So research design, methodology, grant writing skills, and critical review. These are the sort of things that we, you know, offer across different ways of doing it. So certainly with the research design, with a technical study, it can be quite hard to bring it back into how it's going to work within a clinical trial, but the amount of methodologists that sit within the research design service across the country, we can definitely help you with the research design, and certainly with specific methodology. And we might be able to signpost you to key people that you might need on your team within the universities, because we tend to know, you know, the organisations around us. We can definitely help with grant writing skills. It is very much around about, you know, how you write and get it into the application so that it gets through, and we can definitely help that. And we can easily do the critical review. So it's very much around about, we can review it as you're putting it together, or it can come into like our final review panel once a month, certainly within the East Midlands, and then it goes into a panel that is very similar to how a funding panel would be looking at. With the i4is as well, because it's a Dragon's Den type interview at stage 2, we can help you prepare for that. So finally, these are some useful links. Certainly some of the RDS resources we've signposted across the country to different resources that are available. RDS South Central have some really good YouTube videos available around their grant applications and how to write them. RDS London have some really nice resources around different methodologies, and there's the RDS blog, which covers lots of different topics that might be current at the moment. There is a link to the PPI resources, but I would say contact your local, there's PPI representatives that sit within the trust, within the universities that you work at, but also we have a PPI lead for the region as well, and so do all of the regions of the RDS. You will need to put in probably a SOCAT form, and that's scheduling of costs. That's out of CRN, so I would contact, there's the link there to tell you more about it, especially if there's treatment costs or research costs involved, and the CRN contact there for Support My Study East Midlands. There will be one for each of the different regions, but get in contact with them earlier, especially if it's something going through into the NHS. So any questions we'll put into the chat, and I'll pick those up at the end in the questions and answer part of the panel, but I will now pass over back to Sean.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That's great. We will get those links to you either in the chat or in an email at some point, because I think they're really helpful. So thank you very much. Any questions for Rachel, please put them in the chat. But next we have Roger Baston, who's the first of our speakers, who's looking at a successful, or telling you about their successful i4i application and focusing on the methodology within that. So over to you, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm assuming everyone can see our screen. This was an NIHR i4i, and the amount was shown here is just over 300,000 for 3 years. Interestingly, the theme call was antimicrobial resistance, and we put in an application that was related to the characterization and commercialization of a long-term antimicrobial urinary catheter. Now, the way that fits into the call is that if this is successful, then it will reduce the number of infections and therefore reduce antibiotic use, therefore hopefully reduce resistance. So that sort of thing was built into the rationale before we started. Now, very briefly, because Rachel has taken us very nicely through most of the basics of this and so on, we have to identify a clinical need. And there was a very strong clinical need here. First of all, there was no existing technology to provide up to 3 months protection from infection in long-term urinary catheter users. This 3 months is important because all the catheters in this group are expected to last for at least several weeks, up to 3 months, and then they all get changed anyway. This is in contrast with the short-term catheters that are often used in hospitals that are used for maybe a few days or a couple of weeks or something like that. The difference is very, very important. There is no commercialized or available technology to deal with this 3 months protection. The groups who depend on these catheters are considerable across the country and in fact worldwide. Spinal cord injury patients, people with multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, in fact, any neurological condition that affects the control of bladder function. And these people depend upon these catheters for their life, and they have these catheters for life usually. So this is very important for them, and this was a very strong clinical need that wasn't being met. Also important, I think, was that we had our own patented technology as IP. It was our own invention, if you want to put it that way, and it had already been used in a widely available commercialized neurosurgical device, which is now available worldwide. So we had some basis on which to claim that it might work, and this I think was quite a strong argument to put. Also, our oops, sorry. Also, our technology had undergone laboratory studies to show that we could reach this 3 months activity against the bacteria that cause the infections concerned. So we had to very carefully make that link before we applied for the funding. And then the supporting background to the application, we had a very strong team, all had good CVs with relevant publications, and previous experience with the technology, again, was very important here, I think. There were good clinical links to the clinical need. We had a urologist on board and links to other urologists, and we used those during the trial management. Sorry, don't seem to be moving on. Right. We had a very active PPI input, and this has been emphasized just now by Rachel. And I know you've had a session on this, but this was very important to us. And we learned a lot from our PPI people, representatives from the Spinal Cord Injury Association and people like this, who actually had much more of a detailed insight into the condition and what can go wrong and what might actually be seen as adverse outcomes in this catheter that we need to keep a lookout for than the urologists. So it was PPI people who were very much informing us on this, and they became very important. They also formed part of the trial management committee and came to every meeting of the trial management committee. We also had access to patients, and this is very important to make sure that if you are going to recruit patients to a study, you have a good confidence that you're going to be able to find enough of them in the time available. We had good R&D support from University of Nottingham in terms of IP management and commercialization advice, etc. And we also had written support from stakeholders such as patient support groups and an industrial partner. The evidence of interest from industrial partners is, I think, important because what we're working towards here is getting this from the laboratory into the clinic, and that has to go via a manufacturer if it's the sort of device that we're talking about. We're not a factory. We can produce things for research, but we're not intending to produce them for commercialization and sale. So that's very important. So the stages that we went through obviously were stage 1, which was the preliminary, and it's wonderful if you get a letter saying that we're pleased to inform you that you've reached stage 2. At that point, of course, you have questions from the panel from the preliminary application. Sometimes, of course, these can be quite tough. We were very pleasantly surprised to find that ours were very supportive, and some of them were asking for further information, such as to provide a rationale for funding, considering that there's no new IP to be generated. So we're not going to be generating royalties and fees like that from this because there is no new IP. Well, after consultation with the business engagement services at the university, we were able to say that we have identified new intellectual property that could be used to extend the patents for this application and might bring in revenue in the future. And this was accepted as being satisfactory. Sorry, you've gone back a little too far here. There we are. We were asked to meet the Gosh, we're straight jumping about. We were asked to meet the Research Ethics Committee panel in Birmingham, and this was attended by one of our PI people, a researcher, by our PI, that's me, a researcher, and one of our PPI members. And the attendance by the PPI member was commended by the panel, and they actually asked the PPI person quite a lot of questions, and they were delighted that they turned up and were able to join in. I think that's very important to consider when you go to your research ethics panel or in any other communication about your product. The Research Management Committee was attended by all of the team, as far as I can remember, at almost all of the meetings. and particularly by the NIHR project manager. And that is said to be unusual. The project manager said he was intrigued by the project and enjoyed every meeting and was delighted. So we were quite pleased with that too. And of course, we have to pay attention to timelines, and we have to say at each step that we have met those timelines fully. And if not, then we have to explain why not. So that's really where we are. Now, my colleague, Maarten Taal, is going to carry on with this presentation with the second of our NIHR applications, which was also successful using the same technology. So I've described more or less, say, the technology, and he might need to go into that in greater detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. So yeah, again, any questions, just add them into the chat. I think I've got a few if no one else does, but yeah, that'll be at the end. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Roger. So yes, so my talk follows on quite nicely from what Roger has shared with us, because it uses similar technology, but this was a separate i4i grant application to get funding to do an initial patient acceptability and tolerability study for a antimicrobial impregnated catheter for peritoneal dialysis. I'll try to focus just on aspects that maybe Roger hasn't emphasized, but I think a key part of our success in this application, again, was the team. And so we had expertise from microbiology with Roger and his team. We had renal physicians, myself and two colleagues. And then importantly, actually, we had a patient as a co-applicant, which was, I think, a key strength. And in fact, our patient is his business is in graphic design, so he actually produced quite a lot of the graphics on this slide, which was an extra bonus. So to orientate you, peritoneal dialysis is one of the forms of renal replacement therapy, and the way it works is that you need to place a silicone catheter permanently in the peritoneal cavity, and then you use that catheter to run dialysis fluid into the abdomen. It then stays in the abdomen on average for 4 hours and then is drained out. And that process is repeated on average 4 times a day. Everybody has usually heard of hemodialysis. Peritoneal dialysis is not used nearly as much in the UK, only about 5% of people needing dialysis. But in fact, in some countries and some locations, it is the dominant form of dialysis. So for example, in New Zealand and in Hong Kong, the majority of patients are on peritoneal dialysis, and we estimate there are about 200,000 people on what we call PD around the globe. The advantages are that this is a therapy patients can do continuously at home, so it puts them in control of their own management, and particularly during COVID, it's been an advantage because these patients have been able to isolate without the risk of contracting COVID in hospital, which was a problem for many of our hemodialysis patients. The main disadvantages are the risk of infection, and that's really what this project is about. So infection related to the silicone catheter and associated with that loss of efficacy of the dialysis. So the complications that we're really concerned about are peritonitis. And so you can get contamination of the peritoneal dialysis catheter and the infection spreading into the peritoneal cavity, which causes peritonitis, which is very unpleasant for patients. It sometimes requires hospital admission. It always requires antibiotic therapy. And in worst case scenarios, it requires removal of the peritoneal dialysis catheter, which means that the patient needs to move over to hemodialysis. And because it's a form of infection, it's also associated with a mortality rate, and it accounts for about 1/5 of all deaths in people on dialysis, peritoneal dialysis. So it is a major challenge. In putting this project together, we divided the work into work packages, which I think was well received and helped us to organize the project. So you'll see the first one related to the project management, and then we have a work package related to PPI involvement with our patient co-applicant. And then there was a package around the device development, the clinical study, and then we had 3 work packages, which I think was important, related to regulatory issues, the commercialization of the product, and planning for adoption and dissemination. So the clinical study was actually a very simple study. As I said, the primary aim was to investigate the tolerability and acceptability of the antimicrobial impregnated catheter. And the design simply was to study 40 patients who would be having a PD catheter inserted. And very simply, we would just place an antimicrobial catheter instead of a standard catheter. We deliberately designed the study assessments to coincide with the normal clinical protocol for somebody who's recently had a new catheter inserted. And the primary outcome was adverse events which are attributable to the antimicrobial catheter. And you can see there we had a range of secondary outcomes, which I think are also important and which will be important for designing a future study. So I've mentioned the peritonitis. Perhaps on this slide, the additional point to be made is that quite a lot of this infection of the catheter relates to the formation of biofilm, which is a hazard for all indwelling devices that are placed in the body. And the idea behind this antibiotic impregnated catheter is that it kills bacteria on contact, and so helps to prevent biofilm development. This is just a couple of words about the actual technology, as Roger alluded. So this is not a coating. The 3 different antimicrobials are actually impregnated within the silicon that is used to make the catheter. And so as antimicrobial is washed off the surface, new molecules move to the surface to replace them. And that allows a high level of antimicrobial efficacy on the surface to prevent colonization of the catheter. As Roger mentioned, he already, by the time we made this application, he already had a funded application to use the same technology in urinary catheters. And in fact, he's previously been successful in using similar technology in neurosurgical catheters. So we did have the strength that the technology has been shown to be applicable and effective in human patients. And I think that was a very strong advantage that we had. So I'm just aware of time, so I'm not going to say too much about that slide. In our application, we also made sure that we were very clear about the value proposition of the antimicrobial catheters, and we focused that both in terms of patients, which is obviously around reducing infection rates and improving quality of life, but also for healthcare professionals and for the wider NHS. And I think that was also a key to our success. And then finally, we did quite a lot of work, and we had some expert input from one of our team members who've got a lot of experience with IP issues and commercialization. So we went into great detail about the IP issues. Roger already holds a patent for this technology, and we had a clear plan of how we would deal with that during the development of the project. And then finally, commercial exploitation. And so we're fortunate to have good support from Cheetah, and we'll be hearing from them next, I think, this afternoon, as well as the Academic Health Science Network. And then we had a commercial partner in Kimmel, who is the company that actually makes the catheters. So I think bringing all those components together was really a key to our success. So I've spoken quite quickly to keep us to time, but I think that having a strong team, having a clear and important clinical question, and having all of the necessary collaborating partners were keys to the success of this particular application. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Martin. That's a fantastic talk, and yeah, you definitely got lucky there with your PPI member with the art they're doing there for you. Next is Sarah Bolton from the Centre for Healthcare Technologies. So I'll pass over to Sarah.
Thank you, Sean. Hopefully you can see my slides there. As Martin just alluded to, I'm part of Cheetah, and we sit within Nottingham University Hospitals. There we go. So we advise medtech developers, whether they're from clinical, academic or commercial organisations, and we help them gather the evidence to support NHS adoption. And because we sit in the NHS, we come at it very much from that perspective. We cover medical devices and medical equipment and in vitro diagnostics, and we also offer some support for software as a medical device. So I'm going to start just by going through how medical devices are regulated in the UK, and obviously recently this has become a lot more complicated with Brexit and what have you. So in each country there's a competent authority, and ours is the MHRA, and they're responsible for all medical devices and in vitro diagnostics. See, in the UK we now are keeping going with the directives for the time being, so the medical device, in vitro diagnostic and active implantable medical device directives, and you need to comply with those to get a UK CA mark, and that's just for the UK. If you want to put the product on the market in Europe, you'll obviously need a CE mark, as we used to have, and that now follows the EU regulations, medical device regulations, and the in vitro diagnostic regulations when they come in. So for a lot of companies that are going for UK and European markets, we've got us with the dual regulatory compliance route, which is not fantastic, but it's where we are. And we also expect that the UK, because the directives are quite old, they were to be replaced by the regulations, and the regulations were an awful lot better. We do expect that at some point the UK will move kind of more towards the regulations. So it's a very much sort of ever-changing place at the moment. So I put a rider on the slides that this is correct as of a couple of days ago. There should be a link further on in the presentation to the MHRA website, and I would advise you to keep checking back there if you're unsure about anything, because that's obviously where the most up-to-date information is. So Cheetah obviously help any medtech developers get their devices ready for the NHS, and there's 4 key things that the NHS wants from device manufacturers. One, that it's regulatory compliant, that it works, that they can use it, it fits into the patient and the hospital pathway, and as Murray will talk about later, that it's got some health economics underpinning it, and that it is in fact cost saving. So very quickly, there's sort of 7 key steps to regulatory compliance, and this applies to UK CA and a CE mark. If I say CE mark, I also mean CA mark. That's sort of interchangeable at the moment. So first of all, you have to identify what regulation is going to apply to your device, and also what standards come with those regulations and fit your device. Then looking sort of more closely into the standards and the regulations, what are the specific requirements detailed in those standards and those regulations that actually apply to your device? So under the MDD, we've got the essential requirements, or under the MDR, we've got the general safety and performance requirements. So you need to have a good look at those, understand what applies, what bits don't apply. And it's fine if bits don't apply, as long as you can justify why you haven't included them. Again, you need to understand the classification. So this is really one of the first things that sort of needs doing, to look and decide what class of device it is, because then it makes a difference on your route to regulatory compliance. So for medical devices, you've got class 1, 2A, 2B and 3. For class 1, you don't generally need a notified body unless it's sterile, has a measuring function or is a reusable surgical instrument. So for class 1 devices, you don't need notified body involvement and you can self-certify. But for the others, you do need this independent conformity assessment, and it does make a difference to the regulatory burden when you're preparing your technical files and what have you. And you need to look at the clinical evaluation. So what is the current evidence base? What needs doing? Obviously, under the regulation, there's a much greater need for clinical studies, particularly for class 3. And the competent authorities are very much clamping down on devices that claim equivalence with something else that's on the market. You need to do an awful lot more work now to claim equivalence. So you need to have a good look at the clinical evidence base, how you're going to get that clinical evidence, what studies do you need to undertake, and to complete a clinical evaluation report. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment. Then the next step is to test the product. So you've already determined back in step 2 what standards apply and what particular requirements apply to your device. Then you can test the products against that, detail it all in your technical file, but you also need to understand whether you need any external input. So do you need a UCAS test house, for example, to do some specific testing, sort of electrical testing and what have you. And then point 6 makes it look very easy. Compile the technical documentation, your technical file, and involve an approved body, which is for the UKCA, or a notified body for the CE mark if required. And then it's a doddle, just fix the CE mark onto it and sell the device. So although it's only 7 steps, there's an awful lot of detail behind each of those. So where to start? It's really important right at the start to understand what it is that you're dealing with. We do get a lot of academic groups and companies coming to us. They're not sure if it's a medical device or not. We've had some people that have been ploughing on down a medical device route, and actually it's been PPE, or people who've planned their project with the medical device regulations in mind, and actually it's an IVD, so it's very, very different. So it's crucial that you determine exactly what it is that you're dealing with, and also what the classification will be. As I said earlier, class 1s are self-certification, class 2A, 2B and 3 involve a lot more work. And if you're really not sure, seek advice from the MHRA before you start writing your submission, because if you write that it's an IVD and it turns out that you're a medical device, it does make a huge difference. And the MHRA are pretty good, if you outline in the email exactly what your device is, what your intended use is, and where you think it sits, they will come back with advice. There's usually a caveat that the advice is based on the information that you have given. So if you change anything, obviously that information becomes null and void. But it's the buck stops with the MHRA. They are the competent authority. So if you're really unsure, it's probably best to check there first. And throughout the grant, it's pretty unlikely that any project will, finish the grant by being able to stick the CE mark on their product. And as Martin and Roger showed in their presentation, we tend to recommend that you state that you'll be CE mark ready or nearing CE mark readiness by the end of the project. And also that way, if you put that you're going to affix a CE mark as your final milestone and you don't reach that milestone, then that's a whole extra headache to deal with. So the main regulatory activity that would go into the grant would be the technical file. And I can only say start as you mean to go on. And it's really advisable to include in the submission that the project team will compile this as they go through all the development work packages. It obviously avoids a lot of duplication and effort, and you really need to appreciate what the end product is to look like sort of before you start in terms of the structure, etc. And the different sort of work packages will all contribute to an overall regulatory work package or task to then create the final kind of technical file. And I would just say, do not underestimate the amount of time and effort that this will take. It is, you know, it can be months of work that needs to be included in the submission or taken into account at any rate. So there are various additional pieces of work that would need including in the grant application. So one of the main things is the biocompatibility testing, and I know Roger and Martin have got this sorted with their catheter, because also they've taken an existing catheter and they've changed it in terms of the chemical makeup of it. So it would need further biocompatibility testing, and that can be expensive, you know, £10,000–15,000 to do the testing and get the report. It can take time, and you will need that information for the IRAS form and the clinical investigation. Again, is the device going to be sterile? We've been involved in another project where we assumed that they're using a validated sterilisation company that had all of the correct certifications and whatnot would be good enough, but actually it wasn't. It got bounced back by the MHRA, and we've had to go and do some other work and also find the use for clean room. Electrical devices will need very specific testing, particularly if there's EMC requirements or other electrical requirements. And again, you might want to do some pre-compliance testing, which could be done in a local university. But again, that wouldn't be sufficient for the test house, but at least you would know if it was going to pass before you paid the money to go to a UCAS accredited test house. And similarly, you know, what specific functions are needed. So you need to kind of really understand what other contractors are needed to get you to regulatory compliance. So I'm going to talk very quickly now about clinical studies with a non-CA marked device. And this is the link to the MHRA document, Guidance for Manufacturers. So if you plan on using a non-CACE marked medical device on human subjects, you will be required to notify the MHRA of your planned investigation. Now, this is just for medical devices. It's slightly different for IVDs. But I'm just going to focus on the medical devices at the minute, because IVDs are less likely to need MHRA involvement. So if you're going to use a non-CE marked device on patients, you need what's called a letter of no objection from the MHRA. And you know, if there's clear intent to commercialize your product, you're working with a commercial company, and also crucially, you wish to use any data from that study in your technical file, then you should go through the letter of no objection route. It's just good practice to be doing that from the get-go. There are also fees included, so don't forget to include those. They can be quite substantial if you need to submit and then do a resubmission. And the MHRA letter of no objection, you apply for that via IRAS, and it runs alongside the rec review, and you've got a minimum sort of 60-day turnaround on that. There's quite a lot of stuff to send to the MHRA in line with this submission. These are some of the key documents: an investigator's brochure, which is not part of your technical file, but all these other documents, device details, your PR matrix, standards, the risk management, the summaries, these are all parts of your technical file. So if you've been doing your job right from the get-go and starting to compile all of these documents, by the time you come to do the clinical work, then you should be in a reasonably good place. And again, you can say I've included the sterilisation report, the biocompatibility report, anything on software design and electrical safety, which you will need to submit to the MHRA. So just thinking that's what's needed, how should I include it in the submission? So I think as Martin and Roger have already outlined, it's usually helpful to have either a dedicated regulatory work package or have that as part of a commercialization work package. And it basically collects all the information from the other work packages and kind of oversees the whole kind of regulatory process. And it should span the full time scale of the grant in the Gantt. And the typical sort of tasks and things, so regulatory review, standards identification, collating the technical file. I mean, that's the key activity, really, making sure that everything is one place. Your deliverables will be to establish a technical file format, the IRAS submission, and of course the letter of no objection is a good milestone to put in. If you don't get that, you can't move forward. And that's obviously not an exhaustive list, but some examples of what might be done. So going back to that list in terms of getting CE mark, so what can be done before you submit? You can determine what regulations and standards apply, and you can have a look and work out what classification of device you're going to be, so that you can determine and include that conformity route in your grant application. And then what can you achieve as part of the project? Well, almost everything up to affixing the CE mark. All of these can be done within the grant and can be fully costed in. So I'm going to end just by putting up this final slide. This is the link to the medical device directives and the regulations and the MEDDEVs, which are quite important accompanying documents that tell you how to do things. On this EU tab, there's a couple of different, on the EU website, there's a couple of different tabs for directives and regulations. And then the MHRA ones, regulating medical devices in the UK, very important to keep up to date with that as things change, and the notifying the MHRA about a clinical investigation. So I will leave it there, and again, any questions, please do put them in the chat, and I'll hand back to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was a lot of stuff. I'm not surprised, but it's yeah, it felt like you just touched on the surface of it. Thank you very much. We will get those links to go together with Rachel's links from her talk, so you all have a clickable version of those links. Thank you very much. So our final talk for today is Murray Smith from the University of Lincoln, and he'll be talking on cost evaluation and effectiveness of i4i projects. Thank you, Murray.
Okay, is it up on screen then?
Yeah.
Yes, we've got it.
Not in screen slideshow yet.
Slideshow. Okay.
That's great.
All right. So my time today, I was going to look at roles for health economics in your i4i. I've been involved in a number of i4is over the years, varying degrees of success. The health economics component has been of increasing use or desire as far as the funders are concerned. Not only are they want an invention or a device that is works and can be sold, but they want to know if they're getting any value for money from this. Next screen. So as far as the with your device, the funders here are the NHS, and ultimately through the NIHR. And their perspective of the analysis for them is, does this device, will it work for the NHS and its patients? Now, you as the inventor here will be looking maybe well beyond the NHS, maybe looking at other countries where you want to ultimately sell your technology, your device. But as far as the funders are concerned and so on, they want to see value for money within the NHS. Benefit, the costs and the benefits as far as the NHS and its patients are concerned. So the health economics will focus on that. The commercialization side of things that you've had previous talks, that will look at markets beyond the NHS. But the health economics that you use in your i4i will be focused on the NHS and its patients. And basically, you want to bring some value to the benefits that your invention brings. And you'll have, as the developer, as the inventor, you will have a good idea of what those are, those benefits might be. And
they need to be valued preferably in a common unit, pounds is the obvious one here. Benefits, some will be sketchy and hypothetical. You won't really think they have this is a benefit or not, through to you'll know a lot about the benefits that they will have, and this is at the start. So the economists that you use should be able to provide estimates of most of those through the course of the project. But there will always be some components in there that just will be guesswork. And the best or the prime example of that is the unit cost of the invention itself. You'll have an idea how much you think it will sell for. Your commercial partner will have an idea as well. The two may or may not agree. Nevertheless, that unit cost may, for the life of the project, just not be known. So the economics has to be sufficiently flexible to account for that sort of that some things about costs and benefits will be unknown. Early on in the project, I always, when I'm involved in an i4i, I was always looking to provide some sort of value proposition about the invention itself or the device itself. This is, well, let's call it a headroom price. And essentially that's the price point at which costs or expected costs and expected benefits will balance between each other. So that is sort of as a ceiling price. It's a price of where the NHS would be indifferent between buying or not buying the invention. It's equally balanced. If the actual price ultimately turns out to be higher than that headroom price, then that's not particularly good. It's suggesting that it has no viability or it wouldn't ultimately be cost effective in the NHS. On the other hand, if it is the actual price ultimately comes in lower than that headroom price, then you would get that is starting to be evidence for its being brought in to the NHS. So with sometimes you have in the bid you specify stop goes, so you'd be looking to have a go if that ceiling headroom price comes in at above the expected unit price. As the project progresses, you're going to gather more and more information. You will be looking at results from your pilot trials. You're going to test it out on a sample of patients as well. As that project progresses, you'll get, and more information is gathered, then so too will the health economics be able to update that value proposition. You'll start to look at considerations closer to, is this device, is it cost saving to the NHS? Maybe it's not cost saving, but maybe it's cost effective to the NHS. Those sorts of considerations will come into play with the health economics, given though that there is still the primary piece of information that's unknown is that what is the cost of the device. So there's always a degree of arbitrariness here that the health economics should have built into it if it's going to be done correctly. If you look at, for instance, nice medical technologies, if you want to have, ultimately, you may be looking to get an assessment of your invention, seek guidance for its acceptability within the NHS. And it offers, basically, there are those 3 dot points there that NICE specify, and that's pretty much what the health economics looks at or is trying to establish as it moves through the course of the project, your i4i project. So does it offer substantial benefits to patients or the healthcare system compared with current practice? So there's quite a bit in there. There's substantial benefits. It's got patients or the healthcare system. So there's could benefit patients and the healthcare system. So there are various pieces there, and also with the current practice. So what are the comparators here against your technology? Are the benefits plausible, clearly described, easily understood, and supported by evidence? So this is where you're starting to build your body of evidence on with the pilot work, or you may be running a small RCT through your i4i. There seems to be more money from the i4i to do that these days. And the whole point, as far as more NICE are concerned, is to develop guidance on its use. Ultimately, though, at the start for an i4i, you should seek a system with the economics sooner rather than later. Every i4i bid that I've been associated with, the ones where I've been involved in, this is just glib, the ones that I've been involved with early on have been got through. The ones where I've come in late, they haven't got through at all. These days, I would expect a successful i4i project to include a health economics work package within the bid. So you need some sort of design of that work package from the get-go. Your RDS, your local RDS unit will can provide that support. They can maybe do that themselves. They'll have an in-house economist that they can assign to your bid. They may be able to find a health economist for you, but I would advise that you bring a health economist in. Anyway, I think at that point I will finish.
Thank you very much, Murray. That's fantastic as well. So we've had quite a few talks there, and I haven't seen any questions in the chat yet. I don't know if that is because people are waiting